I've done pre-sale. I've done buy and hold. I've done BRRRR strategy before. I've wholesaled. I've even bought corporate shares of a development, trying to acquire properties that way. So I've definitely dabbled in a little bit. I got my hands dirty in a couple of situations, a couple of times, but all in the spirit of real estate in the game. That essentially it is to acquire, to invest, and see the creative ways that we can make our money work for us.
This is the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast, your home for all things Saskatchewan, all things real estate. This week on the podcast, we're chatting to someone who, at the very beginning of my real estate career, you were one of my first Zoom calls, Dane. We met on the Bigger Pockets forum, and then there was actually this really cool connection that you are from Melfort, I'm from St. Brew, and I think in the same way, we've kind of grown in our careers in different spaces around the same time. So it's really surreal to be interviewing you here on the podcast and chatting about your journey in real estate. So first off, welcome to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Ron. It doesn't even feel that long ago when, like I said, we were chatting on Bigger Pockets. I called you, I think that same week, just so we could connect and hear about who we are, what we were doing, what we were trying to accomplish. And look at us now a couple of years later. So no, really looking forward to connect and diving a bit deeper into real estate investing here in Saskatchewan.
When we revisit this conversation in 5 years, that will be the to kind of do the check-in. For anyone who doesn't know you, Dane, you're very active on the different real estate forums in Saskatchewan, but just walk us through who you are, what's your specialty in real estate investing, and kind of give us an idea of where you're sitting at right now as far as a portfolio.
Hey, happy to. So I'm what some people would call your still standard 9-to-5er, but with the aspirations of being that passive real estate investor. So I've been investing here specifically in the Saskatoon market for 5 years now, starting in 2020. And at this point, my wife and I we currently have 5 properties that we own ourselves, all of which are suited. So we own 5 properties here in Saskatchewan. I have dabbled in a little bit of everything in real estate and real estate investing over the past 5 years. I've mainly been prioritizing education, learning, and trying new things to challenge myself to understand what are the best strategies as I can start putting gas on the right ones and then really start scaling my portfolio. So of the 5 that we've done so far, and I've even had 3 other transactions come in and out of my portfolio in that time, I've done pre-sale. I've done buy and hold. I've done BRRRR strategy before. I've wholesaled. I've even bought corporate shares of a development, trying to acquire properties that way. So I've definitely dabbled in a little bit. I got my hands dirty in a couple of situations, a couple of times, but all in the spirit of real estate in the game. That essentially it is to acquire, to invest, and see the creative ways that we can make our money work for us. So at this point, we have 10 doors, still continue scaling, and the intention, the aspiration, is that after these 5, which the goal was 5 properties within 5 years, now that we checked the box, now we're looking at doing bigger and bigger projects, hoping to do more of that medium density housing, like $2 million to $20 million projects in the coming years. So only bigger and better things, Ron.
The thing that I love about what you're saying, Dane, is that throw it against the wall and see what sticks or what feels right to me. So I love that idea of forget about trying to get the perfect strategy. Let's try out a bunch of different things. And you're young. You have the ability to kind of take the bruises, make some learning opportunities within those. And so I really enjoy that. And now that you're kind of hitting the second chapter of the story, now you can kind of dive into this is where I want to move with a little bit more focus. Let's take a step back first, though. What first got you into real estate investing, or what attracted you to that type of portfolio?
So what really sparked that little spark at the beginning? It all started a bit when I was just getting ready to leave university and the fear of adulthood kind of coming out, of being responsible. So at that time, throughout the university journey, I was lucky enough, I was blessed enough to be Have my parents, they purchased a townhouse in Saskatoon where I was going to university. But they approached me and said, Dane, here's our cost of the condo. So it's up to you now to help fill these rooms to make sure that we're covering all our costs. Can you do that? At that time, I was like, oh, easy math. Here's the numbers. Got to make sure that kind of comes through. So that was my first, even just introduction to looking at numbers in real estate and saying, hey, does this make sense? And a few years down the road, I get a job. I took 5 years to save up my first down payment on a property. And my girlfriend at the time was saying, hey, let's move in together. And at this time, I was like, better idea. Let's buy a house together. And a little to her dismay at first, but I after some coercing, after saying, hey, I think we can do this. We put the numbers together, and I said, I think this is the right move right now in our life. And it was at that time that I already had a comprehension of expenses versus income because of my experience at the townhouse through the university years that my parents kind of handed to me. So knowing that, I started reaching out to bigger pockets, connecting on the Facebook forums, just looking and yearning for more information from people that have already done it before. And the one beautiful, beautiful thing about living in the 21st century is the access to information is bountiful. So didn't take long to find real estate calculators, to connect with local investors who had 5, 10, 50 properties and ask some questions about some of the biggest fallbacks. So once I had a little bit of confidence in even just the calculation of here's your expenses, here's your income, then it comes the scary part of actually pulling the trigger on something. So the very first step was actually, I was dead on convinced that we're going to buy a rundown house somewhere in Saskatoon. And my wife's going to have to live in a renovation zone for the next 6 to 8 months, which she was not thrilled about. But what I did kind of implant in her was, hey, honey, we have to follow the numbers. And if the numbers make sense, that's when we move. And to my surprise, we actually found a pre-construction property. It's a detached house with an independent suite in it where the numbers looked fantastic. And she put my foot in my mouth saying, hey, Dane, do the numbers work? And I said, you're right, they do. So at that point, we pulled the trigger on a pre-construction. And it was lucky enough, it was actually lucky for buyers. It was actually the beginning of 2020, right before we had some high volatility with building costs. So we got in a really good entry point and was able to have some high levels of appreciation in within a year or two.
That's so wonderful. And I love the idea of bringing your partner into the conversation because a lot of us with a girlfriend, wife, boyfriend, husband, if there's one person who's like, I really want to do this, it is super important to have the other person on board. And was it really kind of a conversation about like big term thinking, Dane, or how do you kind of bring the other person on board? Or you just give them a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad and say, please read this and just adopt this mentality? Or what's the conversation, or how did you approach that?
With your partner, you don't want it to be a fight. And so at the very beginning, it's about having a big, let's step back conversation saying, well, is this something we want for us? And if it is, what do we want it to look like? So what I had to do in the early stages, because I had an idea. I wanted to buy properties. I wanted to grow a portfolio. I wanted to do all these big things. But if you only talk about the work and the negative side of it, of course they're not going to want that. Why would someone want their partner that only looks at the MLS in their spare time and analyzes deals on spreadsheets instead of like hanging out and having coffee with them? Yeah, they don't want that. But by sharing the vision, saying what this could be, what this could mean for us and a family, is that in 10, 15 years, if you want to work part-time, if I want to work part-time, if we want to spend even more amount of time with our family, wouldn't that be something that you would also want? So by aligning on some of these larger, more 10-year, 20-year goals and desires that this can provide, it made it a bit easier saying, hey, does this align with our goals? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then we can have a constructive conversation around it.
Connecting with the future version of yourself. What while you're buying these properties, 5 of them over 5 years, was there a big success story that you said, like, this was amazing? And would it tie into that first property that you bought, Dane? Or was there another success story within that that you'd say, like, yes, this was a huge win for us along the road?
Well, I would start with, it depends on how you define success. So if we're saying, hey, this was a great financial success, or if this was a great growth success. So I'll start off with more of the growth success first, because it kind of put me in the mindset of how I could almost scale and kind of grow in a healthy way versus an unhealthy way. So one of the first properties in that pre-sale that I shared already is where we saw the numbers. It made sense. I was hitting the numbers, the returns I was wanting, and luckily enough, it was within our budget too. 6 months later, within the next 6 months, I actually purchased another property with some in a joint venture, where I had some friends who were interested in real estate but scared and not sure about the process. So we bought a house, required renovations, and we took it on together. And the mindset was, we're going to go in, do almost everything ourselves that we didn't need a permit for, essentially, and outsource the plumbing, electrical, anything else that required more intensive permitting to the professionals. And in that process, understanding relationships, understanding expectations and accountability, it showed me a few things. One, I will never in my entire life install a kitchen ever again. In that moment, there was a few projects that it turned a light bulb in my brain saying, Dane, this kitchen project, this installation took you 6 to 8 weeks. And you lost evenings, you lost weekends, you still spent more money than you should because of when you messed up. And if you would have just paid someone, you could have had almost 2 months of income. You could have had all your weekends back. And it probably, if not certainly, is an even better product than what you got. So it started showcasing me the value of my time in making sure that I'm putting on the levers that give me the most back, and that I can't do everything yourself. And Ron, especially in your role, I'm sure you can appreciate, real estate investing is not a lone wolf. It's not a single person sport. It's a team effort, and you need to utilize multiple people. Because if you try and do everything, you'll just be swamped, and like I said, you may end up in a life that you don't want to lead, plunging toilets every day and doing these things.
To a very small scale, you can run a lone wolf operation. At a certain point, if you do have bigger aspirations, I would say even, like, 5 properties is probably almost the limit, 10 doors of what you could realistically do by yourself without going a little bit insane of managing 10 different households, 10 different dryers, 10 different stoves, and all of these little dynamics that take place while married, kids, your regular work. It starts to pack on. This is where you need to leverage your time and outsource some of that stuff. You mentioned that this was kind of the growth success, but was there also a financial success that you're like, holy man, this makes like a pile of sense to do this as many times as I can?
It's hard to not stray from that very first one, that very first deal that we did, because it worked out so fantastic, and it even just showcased the power of even just entering the game of real estate, of putting yourself out there and having a chance. Um, I'll give some bare bone numbers. So we purchased this property in a brand new area, and in, like, say, an A-class area in Saskatoon. Pre-sale, suite was already included, and we signed off on papers with our builder for it for just under $400,000, $385,000, which now in Saskatoon, if you're trying to build that exact same house from the exact same builder, it's much closer to 500, like, easy.
Or more.
So, or more. At this point, we had detached garage, we had quartz countertops. It worked out fantastic. So because we knew the numbers, because I said, you know what, this does make sense based off of what we get for it. At the time, that was just market value. And I will say the success of the appreciation is zero in part into my skill in seeing the future. Zero in part. It's partially due to luck and timing. However, if we were just holding back and being hesitant, we could have missed on $100,000 of appreciation. And also in the past 5 years, one of the biggest things that we've seen is the not only the appreciation of value of properties, but appreciation of rents. So this initial step in showcased we had a huge appreciation that we actually utilized to purchase a property this past year. We had rent appreciation, so our rents kept up with our increasing expenses. So, and that one property even allowed us, by leveraging that increased equity, to purchase another property within not even 5 years. Whereas if we were renting, trying to save money, we could have had maybe another down payment, but by taking the risk and being confident in our numbers, literally owning the asset, it just increased the lever so much more. Because how long would it taken me to save $100,000 if I by myself? We all know how groceries are, how electricity bills are. It would be taking a long time. So having something else other than yourself be able to contribute to your own success, your own net worth, is massive. And that's only one property. So imagine 5, 10.
There's an interesting point there. Sorry to cut you off, Dane, where you're essentially making $20,000 a year in appreciation, and it would be really hard to outsave that appreciation. Now, it does sound like you bought at a really nice time, interest rates were low, and that worked largely into your favor. But over a long-term period, like what common advice that we'll give, whether it be real estate agents or mortgage brokers, if you're going to stay in the property 5 to 7 years, appreciation over that time is likely going to work in your favor. So you probably had the gift of, a little bit of good timing. But if you just extend your time horizon, you could take advantage of those same appreciation numbers. So I really like to hear that. I wonder if you're a negative of buying rental properties, Dane, kind of ties into the kitchen story, but walk me through some challenges that you faced in buying properties, because it's not all just collecting rent checks and price appreciation. You are running a business, and there are business challenges in buying real estate. Walk me through some of the things that either surprised you or that were big challenges to overcome.
Hey, absolutely. And that's one thing I want to make sure that it's also given equal time is the negative side. Because especially in the age of social media, it is very common. You hear the daisies, you hear the roses, but you miss the thorns. So some of the lessons, especially early on, that I had to kind of earn my stripes with was I'm not really fully understanding the implications of buying older properties. What does this mean from a plumbing perspective? I'll give a quick story. So that second property that I purchased as a joint venture, where we renovated the kitchen, we renovated the whole property. We purchased it in May, and then after 6 months into November, we were just getting ready to do it. We did the flooring ourselves, we did the kitchen ourselves, the bathrooms, paint, drywall, everything. So we were thinking, thank goodness, we finally have a second source of income from the property. It'll finally start paying us dividends for what we've done and all the effort and all the weekends we've kind of put into it. A month and a half later, 6 weeks after we had tenants move in, we get a phone call. 12:30, say December 23rd, right before Christmas, saying, hey guys, we see water backing up into the house. Something's going on.
Wow.
So our hearts sunk immediately. So we have a friend that owns a plumbing company. We call them out there. They check it out. They put a camera down and they say, I'm not sure if you guys knew yet, but the main line from the house to the street collapsed.
Aha.
So what that means, so at that point, the tenants, they couldn't shower, they couldn't use a kitchen, they couldn't use anything. It would just further wreck the house. So at that point, we had to, luckily the upstairs tenants were on holidays. Downstairs tenants, we put in a hotel for a week. We had to rerun lines into the house as well, and also out to the street. So it was a nightmare. And all the work we just put in, we had to rip up floor, jackhammer concrete. We had to get all this done over the course of Christmas, over the Christmas holidays, to get this all done. And it was almost one of those defeating moments where you're saying, why did I do this to myself? Why did I shoot myself in the foot when this was supposed to be such a good thing? But it was a bit of a humbling moment saying, This is what you signed up for. Now, moving forward, you will always get a camera to check the pipes, check the plumbing before you start doing your major renovations. And that will never happen to me again where I'll miss that point. So it's learnings like that where you don't know what you don't know. And in that moment, we were so eager to rip the drywall down, put up drywall, get everything looking good, and miss just a simple element of, well, the plumbing, electrical, making sure that the plumbing is all in good condition, high quality. So yeah, sometimes you gotta feel the pain and to get a little bit of gain, and that's kind of what that story was all about. And we have more stories than that, but that's just one of the lessons that you have to learn the hard way. And hopefully you don't have to after you hear my advice. So get videos done on old houses before you do renovations. Please.
Good piece of advice. And I also like that now that story is actually like a badge of honor. You're happy that you went through that probably very stressful time. It wasn't very much fun, but it's great to look back on that. And I think it's good to treat those bumps in the road as opportunities. And it sounds like you've done a perfect job of saying, all right, lesson learned. Here's the thing that we will do as a standard operating procedure now when we buy these properties or before we start digging in, is make sure everything that we need to take care of is taken care of. So I really like the mindset around that of not letting it defeat you and become one of those people who say, never buy rental properties. There's no money in it, but treating it as that learning opportunity and saying, I'm a better person for this. And here's how I've grown from that. I'm curious, Dane, and I think a lot of people who listen to different podcasts are looking for some advice on types of properties and how to analyze. And I know everyone kind of has a different secret sauce when they're looking at different properties, but just kind of walk me through in your advice, Dane, if you're giving advice to someone who's looking for maybe that first rental property, what are some of the components that you would tell them to look for? And what are some of the factors that they should be looking at that make it a good property?
Yeah, it's almost one of the first questions that comes up when someone asks, "Oh, I'm really interested. I want to get rental properties," and you have to ask, kind of put the mirror back on them, saying, "Well, why? What makes you interested? What do you want it to do for you?" And the most common answer is saying, "Well, I want passive cash flow. I want some way for my money to work for me in a way that helps allow me to get my time back." That's the most common answer. So one blessing I say that we have just by being in Saskatchewan is that we're almost if you're living in Saskatchewan, we're gifted a market that is below the national standard in pricing in all these different areas. So if I say if I tell someone and say if you're considering buying a property, consider the market first. Make sure that there's economic growth, it's positive. So check the population growth, check economic growth. If you have those two tailwinds and a diverse economy, that's a fantastic start. Third, you have to check average prices versus rent to see, is it possible to cash flow? There's several markets in Canada that actually owning real estate on an annual basis is actually cash flow negative, like in your Torontos, in your Vancouver. So unless you're purchasing them on these large scales with cash, you're not going to be debt servicing it with the rental income. So once you have that growth sorted out, once you have the determinant of the price of the property versus the income, then you can kind of start looking at, well, can this actually cash flow? So at this point, I kind of tell people saying it's an hour-long conversation if you want it to be, but if I'm just going to give you a quick, dirty way to analyze, find the market. Once you've done that, check on your local rents. And then from there, connect with a mortgage broker like Ron here, who can actually tell you, here's what you qualify for, here's what you can purchase, and here's what would it cost you. And from there, have a robust thing here and be honest with your costs. It's easy to be really lenient in saying, you know what, maybe it's about $50 a month for insurance. Maybe I'll have to pay about $100 a month for one vacancy I'll get every 5 years. But it's not realistic. So it's easy to go and say, you know what, I'll pay $1,000 mortgage, $100 for insurance. zero utilities, and then measure cash flow like that. It's a bit of a recipe for not success. By being open and honest about some of these numbers and getting realistic numbers from actual professionals will help you actually have solid numbers and actually calculate a cash flow number. So what I would say, get your mortgage, get your property tax number, get an insurance number, and then calculate at least 10% of your rent to go towards either repairs, vacancy, and your capital expenditures, or your larger scale repairs like your roofs, furnaces, etc. So save 10% of the income, and if you have even more actually at the end, that's your profit. That's your cash from your returns. You can take your annual returns, divide that by the cost of everything you put into it, you'll get a number called cash on cash return. And for those of you that are on bigger pockets, that are on these networks, that'll be a big buzzword. You'll hear cash on cash return. So if you're looking for profit, calculate your cash on cash return, and then hopefully go and analyze some deals.
Wonderful. That was a great breakdown, Dan. I think you did a really good job walking through, and I like that it is specific to each person. And if you are making more of an appreciation play, well, then it's really important to connect with a realtor to say, is this area gentrifying? Is it going up in value, or is this place, fairly stable? If it's strictly about cash flow, talking to a property manager, and figuring out kind of what those rents are, crunching those numbers. So figuring out your why is an important factor in getting on the journey. And then I'd imagine once you've done 1 to 3 properties, you start to know, I know this property cash flows at this amount. I know what my expenses are. And now you can kind of put that cookie cutter and go and search on the MLS or go find those private deals that match a system that you already have. You kind of touched on it a little bit, Dane, on the, getting the pre-approved for the mortgage front, but just walk me through some different financing options that you've seen or employed and that people would take advantage of in Saskatchewan, specifically for, a portfolio like yours.
Absolutely. So as you get more and more properties, it does become more and more difficult because you're servicing more and more debt. So for me, in my experience, the very first properties, they're the easier ones. They're the ones where you show, here's my 2 to 4 years of income. Here's our down payment amount. If you're lucky enough to have some family friends to gift you money for your first down payment, you can do gift letters to help give your source of funds for your down payment, and then do it the traditional way. You get a broker to help you find an amount, you find a house, you send the documents. It's going to be a lot of documents, but it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. And to be honest, that's the traditional way. So that was the very first one we did. At that point, I was out of down payment funds after the first property. The second property, if I said, well, now I need to wait another 5 years to save up a down payment again, I would have had to wait. But I'm an impatient man. So I ended up finding others that were still interested, but didn't have the knowledge that I did about finding properties that could cash flow. So I partnered with people who did have the down payment funds and actually had the ability to put their name on the mortgage. So, and by me bringing the expertise to the table, they felt confident having me be part of the deal and helping execute on it well. So I kind of figured out what's the bottleneck and how can I mitigate that. The third property I did, that was the BRRRR, or for those of you that don't know, it's when you buy, renovate a property, you rent it out, and then you refinance it at a bank. So with that one, I actually got a hard money loan from a vendor, and then from that point, I purchased a property that was vacant and had a fire in it. I spent 4 months renovating it, rented it out, and then I was able to go to a bank and say, hey, here's my property. Here's an appraisal done that says it is now worth $150,000 more. And this is actually the comps that show this is why. And then they were able to give me a 75 to 25 loan of value on that I could pay out the cost of both the purchase price of my hard money loan and most of the cost of the renovations. So at that point, by having that property already in my name and title, it made it easier to go to the bank and show, hey, here's my rental income from the property here. Here's my other income from my current properties and myself. Would you be willing to offer it? And the goal when you go to banks is to be bankable. And if you're not bankable, which is a good track record of high income, is to find people and then build your skills to help them make money in real estate, and then make sure that you're finding a way to create cumulative wealth and share it. So that was the third one. The fourth one, we did essentially a refinance where we pulled out equity in a previous loan and did a umbrella mortgage across three. So that's actually, I did an umbrella mortgage to pull out equity, purchase another property with the equity, and then actually same time refinance that hard money loan. So it's a bit more of a complex process. But what made it possible was by utilizing the income from all the rental properties towards my total income to make sure that my debt service ratio was still on par with what they were really looking for. So my best advice is, as you're scaling, is have some of these more long-term plans when you're talking with your insurance broker, with your mortgage broker, with your lawyer that you have. Because if you say, I want to buy 10 properties, is a very different strategy than what it might be if you only want to hold two or three and pay them off fully and just live off that. So having these expert advice can help you navigate and figure out what are the pitfalls that will stop you from doing it. So it's definitely not an easy path, but as you get going, eventually, my main goal is to have to focus more on the debt service loans later on, but I still need to find 25% no matter what, which is the hope is it gets easier as you go.
The scalability. Walk me through, Dane, what you're seeing in the market right now. I know that you have your finger on the pulse of a lot of things. You're messaging a lot of people on the forums. What are you seeing right now in Saskatchewan real estate? Are there any trends that you're noticing? And as you're having coffee with fellow real estate investors, what are you guys seeing?
So one thing that is definitely a common thread, and not even across just Saskatchewan, but from a national lens, is essentially the whole government backing for more that medium to high density housing. So what we're seeing, whether it's from a housing funds, housing accelerator funds, is that there's a tailwind coming from top down, hoping and trying to get more dense housing in Canada and even in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan in general, because of one of the main crises that we're seeing in Canada, which is that housing supply. So one of the solutions that they're really trying to push forward is making it easier to get zoning, to get permits, and to have cities have infrastructure to help support and improve these larger projects along. So I do think that in the next 5, 10, 20 years, what we're seeing is essentially a surgence of these medium density, high density housing that the hope will help reduce this housing supply crisis we have. And also, as a second layer, make it easier for more economic growth because they'll have more housing around different stores. It'll be easier to access transit. So we'll see some growth within that space, which may actually make it more competitive. And as the value of land essentially is just only based off its best use. And if its best use is as a single family house, that's the pricing for it. But if we start seeing land value now seeing as, well, now we can build a 10-plex, a 20-plex here, the value of some properties will definitely appreciate because its best use has now evolved. So the goal, I would say, is find key areas that are growing, and we'll see growth in these medium to high density developments in the next 5, 10 years. So really focus on how can we make make moves in those spaces, or amass how much you can in single family, because the banks aren't they want to lend money, but they'll only do it with strict criteria.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really like that of determining where the winds are going and adjusting the sails to take advantage of those different government programs. What are the things that are going to be, yeah, like you said, the tailwinds moving into that? I really like that. All right, Dane, second last question before I get to your contact info. And if there's anything you want to ask for, I'll give you that opportunity. But one thing I always like to ask folks is, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself, what advice would you give and why?
Ah, the age old question of wisdom. And there's definitely a few. It doesn't, even though 5 years went by really quick when I first started, it definitely doesn't come without its learnings. And the best lessons are ones that you don't have to learn yourself, the ones you can learn through others. So unfortunately, all three of these, I'd say I had to learn a bit myself. But the first one I'd say is have a high standard for your real estate team. Find people that are experts in their field, that because everyone will want to help you. Anyone can help you if it's an insurance broker, if it's a lawyer. But if they don't know specifically what you want, they may not give you that highest quality of advice. So have high standards with who you partner with. Number two, be generous with everything except your time. One of the things as you start scaling in real estate is that you can be running around like a chicken with your head cut off. But I think that might be a Saskatchewan reference. It's kind of gross, but because there's just so much to do and that you can do. But at the end of the day, let people do their jobs and support you, so you can kind of focus on the growth and do the things that matter most to growing the portfolio. And lastly, there was one more I would have to say is be quick to extend trust, but even quicker to bring it back. You can get burned very quickly in real estate. It's not a small time game. And you will partner with people, you'll talk to people all the time. However, if someone ever burns you, or if someone ever, again, too, doesn't seem like a good partner, be quick to retract it, because and that's okay. Move on with life, but it's important to give it, but it's also important to preserve it.
I really like that because there are so many people who come into real estate and on the outset from social media or from the projection of what they're saying, like this person's super successful. And then you pull the curtain back a little bit and you can make up anything on social media. It doesn't have to be true. And so that due diligence, and even when you get a gut check or a sense that something's not quite right, trust your gut on that and move forward. Really, really good piece of advice. All right, Dane, last question for you. How can people connect with you? And is there anything that you're looking for right now? Is there anything specifically that the podcast verse can help you with?
Absolutely. So if you do want to reach out and connect, I am always excited to talk real estate. If you are considering Saskatoon as a market, if you are just an investor and you enjoy the podcast, always excited to connect. So right now you can follow me on my socials. I do have Instagram, which is developer Dane, at developer Dane. That actually is where I'm doing a bit of a self blog, where I'm showcasing the lessons I'm learning along the way of my real estate journey, from 0 doors all the way up to 100 doors of rental properties. So if you're interested, reach out on there, or reach out, even just mention Saskatoon in the Bigger Pockets forums. I'm always excited to kind of see that, hear who's engaging. And for my main ask for the real estate universe here is, if you are interested in these medium density developments or have land opportunities in Saskatoon where you think this might be possible for utilizing in the future for larger developments, in the next 5 to 10 years, I'll definitely be approaching more projects and initiating things in Saskatoon here to take advantage of it. So if you hear anything, please reach out. I'd be happy to connect.
Very cool. Dane, I love interviewing people like you where you've had, in my opinion, major success. You're a young guy. You own 5 properties, 10 units. If you wanted to, you could completely mail it in from here. Just get those properties paid off. And in 20 years, basically retire. And I love the evolution, and to kind of see that there's still that hunger for more and expanding, and the journey of learning. So I am really happy that we got to chat today, hear a little bit more about your story, and we'll book in that 5-year episode and see if you're closing in on those 100 doors at that time.
Hey, sounds good. I'll expect the calendar invite right away here. So
Okay, sounds good, Dane. Enjoy the rest of your day.
yeah, you too.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. If you like this episode, if you found some value, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button to catch all of our future episodes. A quick plug before we end the podcast here. I am seeing way too many people who are just signing their renewal notices without at least seeing if there is a better offer on the market. Currently, I have clients who I am saving 0.5% with their existing lender just because they're having a quick chat with me and getting them into a mortgage product that offers them more freedom and flexibility. If you have a mortgage renewal coming up, we need to have a conversation to make sure that your bank is not screwing you over. Until next week, I'm Ron Caroni, your Saskatchewan mortgage professional. Bye for now.